Yeah, yes, sir. We can start.
Yeah,
Right. So, hello, students. Welcome to the afternoon session of the fourth lecture of Quantum Mechanics course. I am Kolahal Bhattacharya, and for this session, I will be your academic coordinator for this session. So, as you have already seen, Professor Arvind Kumar, like when you have any doubts, please write in the chat box, and intermittently we'll take some breaks. And at that point, I will communicate your questions to the professor, and he will answer it. Okay. So let's go ahead with the lecture. Thank you.
okay, thank you, Kolahal, and welcome back to this afternoon lecture. So, I think in the morning, most of you answered my question. Second question, I had listed three questions, and we answered the first question about the probability interpretation of psi, etc. And the second question was about how the wave function changes with time, and most of you knew the answer as, and that is the objective of today's lecture, the Schrodinger equation. So we will start with time-dependent Schrodinger equation, and then time-independent Schrodinger equation. Then there is this important concept of degeneracy and some properties of these energy eigenfunctions, etc. And as usual, references and acknowledgements. Okay, begin with time-dependent Schrodinger equation. So we begin with the law of dynamical law as to how psi x changes with time. Now, before I go ahead, I must say that make a general statement that the laws of nature are either directly obtained from observations or experiments, or if they have to be, obtained through a combination of theory. And so the theoretical arguments are never, you cannot theoretically arrive at a law of nature. So if you want to go by the theory mode, you have to go by arguments which are likely to be true. They are called plausible. The word plausible means something which is likely to be correct. We cannot be sure. We can only be sure about our theory when we confront it with experiments. So that is the meaning of plausible arguments. And uh, so we first consider the simple situation, one-dimensional situation, and using some plausible arguments, arrive at the Schrodinger. I will not use the word derive. We arrive at the Schrodinger equation. And we are not following historical uh, order in the sense that we are not going to derive it the way Schrodinger arrived it. It was a very different way from what we are going to do. So we consider a free particle in one dimension. And the first plausible argument is that, well, they show interference and diffraction effects. We know electrons show interference. So we expect, it is only our expectation that the equation that we want to arrive at should satisfy superposition principle. What is superposition principle? If psi1 is a solution and psi2 are solutions, then a linear combination of them is also a solution. Now in mathematics, we know that such a thing is a linear homogeneous differential equation will satisfy this requirement. And therefore, we are looking for a linear homogeneous differential equation as our law. Now, next thing is that for a free particle with definite momentum and energy E, we know by now well that it is associated with a propagation number K and omega. So P equal to H cross omega is a de Broglie relation, and this is called the Einstein relation. So the equation that we have will be describing a particle of momentum P and E and associated with this K and omega. Now, K and omega, I have been repeatedly telling you that in optics, the distinguishing, in quantum mechanics, the distinguishing point is this, that the wave characteristics get related to the mechanical characteristics of the particle. But if we talk about k and omega, then these things are well known. Waves in optics, and a wave, monochromatic wave, like in optics, is represented by either cosine, sine, or the linear combinations, and so on. So we're expecting one or more of these to be a solution of the equation we are trying to arrive at. Now, another important point is that, what would be the relation between omega and k? So that relation comes from quantum mechanics of a single particle. E is equal to p square by 2m, and you substitute E equal to h cross omega and p equal to h cross omega. So we get this relation, this omega, the relation between omega and k is called dispersion relation. So this is the dispersion relation we are looking at, we should get. We should contrast this with the relation for electromagnetic waves or light waves in vacuum, where this relation is very different. It is a linear relation. In linear relation, we say the medium is non-dispersive. So our situation is dispersive. This is non-dispersive. But these are just words. Basically, the point is we should have this relationship between omega and this. This will be a constraint on our thing. So what is the constraint? The solution should be one of these, where omega is related to k by this relation. And also we should be able to superpose solution. These are our expectations. We are trying to guess the equation. We should be able to superpose different k so that we get a wave packet, as we saw this morning. And therefore, it is obvious that the equation itself should not contain k or omega. And if it contains a specific k or omega, then how will it be superposed? So it may contain constants like h cross, m, etc. of the particle, but of course it should not contain c. Now, if I had the time, I would have asked you why, but I give the answer right away, that we are talking of non-relativistic quantum mechanics, as I said in the morning, and c plays a role always in relativistic equations. Otherwise, non-relativistic quantum mechanics, c is infinite, and doesn't play any role in non-relativistic physics, whether classical or quantum. But of course, as a first guess, we could imitate what we know in optics. This is the familiar wave, optics or sound, this is the familiar wave equation of classical physics. We might try that. And in fact, all these forms, all of them satisfy this equation. So we might be very happy with this equation. Why not use this equation? But there is a problem, because if you substitute any of these in this equation, it will get satisfied only if omega square is equal to k square. A double derivative in time will pull out omega square, and double derivative in space will pull out k square. So if they have to be equal, then it will be omega equal to vk. This is v. This is vk. But we don't want this. We want omega equal to this. So this equation has to be rejected because it gives you wrong relation between omega and k, which is what we want. So now the solution is very obvious, because if these have to be one of the solutions, and you want omega on the left hand side and k square on the right hand side, it is obvious that we should have a first derivative one time. Then omega, first derivative pulls out omega, and double derivative on the right pulls out k square. So we are likely to be able to get this relation with proper adjustment of constant. But then what happens if I take single derivative in time, then cosine becomes sine and sine becomes cosine. So these were not going to be the solutions. The solutions may be this, because the E functions have this very nice property that they don't change. You just pull out a factor in the derivative, but the remaining function. Cos, sine, flip. Cos becomes sine and sine becomes flip in one derivative. So it's clear that we should have some equation of this kind. Now, which constants? Just a little adjustment will tell you that of these four forms, this particular form, this e to the power I kx minus omega t will satisfy this equation, and you can just substitute. It's almost trivial. You just substitute this form and you will get omega related to k as we require. Of course, the other form also was possible, but by convention, we take IH cross. So e to the power Ix minus omega t is the solution. We could have done this with a minus sign. And in fact, in some context, which I'm not going to do, the complex conjugate of this equation function is also important. And then this is the solution, but we will not talk about it. So this is the free particle Schrodinger equation for in one dimension for a free particle, of course. Clearly, these are not solutions of this equation. And the solution of the very look of this equation very clearly shows that psi has to be complex. Psi real will not work. If psi is real, the left-hand side is pure imaginary and the right-hand side is real, which can't work. So psi has to be a complex function of xt. So, and now whatever we wanted, k is not there in the equation. The equation doesn't have k. K is appearing as a solution. Sorry, there is no k in the equation. K is in the solution, so we can superpose different k's and we can superpose and we'll get a wave packet solution. And of course, its generalization is obvious. There should not be any difference for free particle in terms of x, y, z. So that is the three-dimensional generalization of single part free particles equation in non-relativistic quantum mechanics. So that this is free particle Schrodinger equation. We have arrived at it, not derived it. And now how to go from free particle to particle with a potential. Now we are stuck here. So one possible guess is that what is happening in this equation. From classical to quantum, what is happening? Classically, it was E equal to P square by 2M. And it has suddenly become this. So it seems like E has become IH cross by delta T operator, and P square has become this operator, minus H square del square. So, and the operators operate on a wave function, and we get this equation. So we have a kind of prescription to go from classical to quantum. Just replace E by this and P by this equation. They become operators, and classical quantities go operators, and they operate on the wave function. And that is how we got this equation. So for potential, we make a guess. It has no logic. It is just a guess. It is just an informed guess that, well, something which worked in free particle might work even with particle with a potential. So it's a guess, and we'll make a guess, and we say, well, with a particle with potential, you get this. You have this equation classically. So you make E as IH cross del by delta P square as this, and put R as R itself. So R becomes the multiplicative operator, whereas P has become. There is some point in it because this morning's lecture you did see something like P playing the role of minus IH, becoming minus IH cross gradient operator, at least in terms of average values. So there's some that's why it's an informed guess that maybe it's correct in general. So we have this equation, and this is the Schrodinger equation in 3 dimensions for a particle with a potential energy V of RT. So this is the famous time-dependent non-relativistic Schrodinger equation. We have arrived at this basic law of quantum dynamics Heuristically means by guesswork, an informed guesswork, which may turn out to be true or may not. So whether it is a correct law of nature or not is something to be determined by experimental consequences. And the experimental consequences are so well verified for non-relativistic Schrodinger equation that we believe this is the law of nature. I should also just make a historical remark here that actually Schrodinger first obtained the relativistic equation by actually his methods were different, but he abandoned the relativistic equation for some reasons. It was not working properly. And then he said, why not try the non-relativistic version? And the non-relativistic version worked very, very well in the non-relativistic regime, in the non-relativistic, when situations are non-relativistic, this quantum equation worked extremely well. And that is how we have got this famous non-relativistic Schrodinger equation. The relativistic version has some other problems, which is not a part of this course. Okay. You note now the Schrodinger equation is first order in time. And what it means is that the psi rt can be determined once you give psi of r at some instant of time. This is different from Newton's second law. In Newton's second law, r is not enough. R is r dot, that is velocity is enough. But in time-dependent Schrodinger equation, psi of rt naught is a full specification. So the dynamical state of a quantum system is fully specified by the wave function alone. I told you the meaning of dynamical state earlier. Dynamical state means if you give it at a certain instant of time, the law of nature determines it at all other times. So the dynamical state of quantum mechanics is given by psi. You don't need anything else. Whereas in dynamical state of classical physics needs not only r but r dot. So we have an entirely different situation. A big departure from classical physics. Okay. Now you learned probability interpretation this morning. So there is now a consistency of interpretation, because we said in the morning that this is constant or one if it is normalized. But we were not talking of, we were saying at a particular instant of time. This morning we did not time of evolution in time. Now if this psi is to evolve in time and still remain normalized, then it is obvious that d by dt of this quantity is 0. Only then probabilistic interpretation will be valid, because at a certain instant of time we can make it to 1. But how are we sure it will remain 1? How are we sure that if a wave function is normalized at some instant, it will remain normalized at all instants? It needs that d by dt of this integral is 0, and d by dt of this integral is determined by Schrodinger equation, because this is psi has a time dependence, and d by dt will be governed by Schrodinger equation. So this is a verification or a consistency condition both on Schrodinger equation as well as our probabilistic interpretation. So the things are intertwined in theoretical physics. I mean, we gave probability interpretation to psi. It seemed fine. Now we have a Schrodinger equation as to how psi changes in time. So we have to make sure that our morning's probability interpretation remains correct. And now it is indeed so, as we can. So using the Schrodinger equations, we can get this equation. Now I leave this as an exercise. It is a simple mathematical exercise. If you want to take derivative of rho, partial derivative, it will be, psi mod square is psi star psi. So derivative will be derivative of psi star into psi plus psi star into derivative of psi, for which we use Schrodinger equation. That will give you some expression. And divergence of S, you take a divergence of this. You can do it orally. It will be gradient psi star dot gradient minus gradient. So gradient, such terms will cancel. But another term will be psi star. Gradient dot gradient is del square. So that term, that expression will be there. Please do it yourself at home, and you will find that what you get from the Schrodinger equation for the first term gets cancelled by the second equation. So this is continuity equation of Schrodinger. It's called continuity equation because it's looks very much like fluid continuity equation. Now we have to get our result. How to get our result? Integrate this equation over time. So then you will get this rho RT dq1. Integrate over all space. Now what happens to this? If you integrate over all space, this quantity, use divergence theorem for it. You all know divergence theorem, that divergence of S over a volume is S normal component F on the bounding surface. Now, if you integrate over all space, the bounding surface is a surface at infinity, where S must vanish. And this is the reason the integral of this quantity vanishes, because integral of this quantity by divergence Gauss's theorem is S normal component S over the surface at infinity. But this quantity S for any localized wave function, any square integral wave function, psi must go to 0 at infinity, and therefore this surface integral will be 0, and that is how you get this. I am speaking out the maths without writing because I am leaving it to you as an exercise. You do it yourself. I have already given you the hint, and therefore Schrodinger equation ensures this condition, which is a necessary condition for probability interpretation to make sense. So probability interpretation to make sense, there are two things. One is the probability should always be positive or at most 0. It can't be negative. So psi mod square is positive or at most 0. So this is fine. The second thing is, if something is interpreted as probability, its integral has to be 1, which means the d by dt of this integral must be 0. So both these conditions are satisfied. So it sort of confirms both the Schrodinger equation as well as the probability interpretation. Both things get confirmed in a way, but of course the final confirmation is in the experimental consequences. So another interesting confirmation, interesting result. It's not a confirmation, but you feel happy with these relations. What is the expectation value of R in a state psi? We saw this morning, it is this. And P, it will be this. This we saw this morning. What are their derivatives? You can obtain derivatives. It's another mathematical exercise. What will you do to obtain these derivatives? Just take d by dt inside, take the derivative of this, use Schrodinger equation, there will be additional term, take the derivative of this. R does not, by the way, depend on derivative. In the formalism we are doing, R does not depend on time. R is independent of time. The time dependence is in psi or psi star. So, and you use Schrodinger equation for psi, you will get something. It's a long exercise, and you will find that it is d by dt R is P by M, where P is given by this. It's not obvious, it needs mathematical derivation. And similarly, d by dt P is minus gradient V. So this is an exercise given in the tutorials, and those who are not doing tutorials, they can look up the textbooks, and these derivations are given everywhere in every quantum textbook. But the interesting point is that they look like classical relations. You know, classically dr by dt is P by M and dP by dt is minus gradient V. So classical equations are true in an average sense, you can say, in quantum mechanics as a broad statement. Okay. So expectation values of position momentum in quantum state, they satisfy classical like relations. Okay, so that is all. We can break for a moment, we can break for questions?
Yes, sir. There are a few questions, and the first question was probably related to the discussion in page number 6 or 7, whether dispersive medium has any effect to relativistic motion.
Relativistic motion. What is that? What does it mean?
So the person who had asked this question, can you please unmute and make the question clearer?
See, don't go by word dispersive, etc. We have a relation omega equal proportional to k square by 2l. And which means if you write omega equal to k times something velocity, that velocity itself depends on k. Now, you know, when light goes through glass, omega, the velocity depends on the wavelength. This is the origin of the word dispersive. So don't worry about words dispersive, etc. It is a relation between omega and k square. So, and omega is not just constant times k. Omega depends, the ratio omega by k, the so-called phase velocity depends on k. It's not a constant. That is all it means. Whether it's a relativistic motion, the answer is this relation does not hold good relativistically, because E equal to P square by 2m is a non-relativistic relation. And relativistic, the relation will be E square equal to C square P square plus 1 m square C square. So the relation between omega and k will be entirely different. But that is going into relativistic quantum mechanics, which I don't think we should get into, because that's a whole lot complicated, and we'll be giving misleading statements if we go just in a simplistic manner to. Sorry for the disturbance. Yeah.
Okay, sir. I think that question was answered well. And the next question is about Schrodinger equation and the interpretation of psi.
Yeah.
This is mathematically representing that psi should be complex. Is there any physical description of claiming psi to be complex?
What does that mean? I told you this morning, I gave you a 5-minute discourse on this business of physical significance. I told you in advanced theories of physics, theoretical quantities are introduced. They may be real, complex, whatever. There'll be operators. They may not be even numbers. They may be operators. And even much more theoretical, difficult theoretical quantities will be introduced in the theory. The requirement of physics is, at the end, the numbers that you match with laboratory must be real, and they should experimental consequences should be satisfied. So there is no problem in psi being complex. It's a theoretical quantity. I told you this morning. It's not like a real wave propagating in space. It's a wave on your paper. And so what's the connection with the experiments? The psi mod square is real, and it is probability density. So what is the question? I told you that at every step of an advanced theory, the quantity does not have direct physical interpretation. Psi does not have any direct physical interpretation. That's the answer to the question. And so it's being complex in nature has no problem. It's not problematic. Psi mod square is real, and it is interpreted with a physical quantity called probability density. Yeah, next.
Sir, the next question is, wave function of a free particle cannot be normalized. How does this make it different from other wave functions? Does it say anything about our arrival at the Schrodinger equation using the free particle wave function?
Again, I do not quite understand the question, but yeah, you are absolutely right that the free particle wave function e to the power ikx is not normalized. The way in physics it is done is that you don't take, there is never in actual situation an absolutely precise value of k. There is always a little range of k. And with that little range of k, the wave packet is normalizable, as we saw this morning. So with a little range of, phi k, if phi k is a delta function for a strict plane wave, but 5K will be a little Gaussian packet. So around some central value of K, a very, very small range, you can superpose waves and then it becomes a normalizable wave packet. So what physicists say that, well, in actual practice, it's never going to be an exact K. It'll always be a little range. So I'll work with those wave packets. So these are idealized situations, and practical situations will take care of the fact that the practical wave packets will always be normalized. Okay, so we are talking of idealized non-normalizable wave packets, but they will not arise in any practical situation. In practical, for example, if you are doing scattering, you can always construct a wave packet, because no experiment will give you monochromatic wave with exact K. There will always be a little range in practical waves. So the wave packet, a practical wave packet will always be normalized. Yeah, next question.
Sir, this one is from the YouTube. Why isn't there an analog of Newton's first law of motion in quantum mechanics? Is one of the reasons that there is always an inherent jitter motion in quantum mechanics?
No, sorry. I think this is wrong. Whatever we are talking about here is an inertial frame. All these laws of nature are in inertial frame. The concept of inertial frame exists everywhere. So we are not going apart from, we are not touching the idea of inertial frame. Inertial frame exists even in, so we are not going away from the concept of inertial. Okay.
Yes.
The second law of motion is a different matter, because the second law of motion, but that in an inertial frame without any environment, the particle remains free, is true even in quantum mechanics. Okay.
Okay, sir, we can probably go ahead at this point.
So we go time-independent Schrodinger equation. Time-independent Schrodinger applies to the situation when the potential is dependent on R. Is independent of T and only depends on R. That is the situation of time-independent Schrodinger equation. What happens mathematically that the wave function, which is a complex function of psi and RT, it can be a separable solution exists, I said. That means you can get a solution in which the time dependence is a product of a function of R and a product of a function of T. We can try this out. You substitute in the Schrodinger equation and divide the whole equation by URFT. You will get this equation. Now, this is a very standard mathematics of separable, solving a partial differential equation by what is known as method of separation of variables. So divide this whole equation. You will find it even in our course, you will find it a number of times. Divide by this equation, U is constant as far as time derivative is concerned. You take it out, divide by UR, so you will get cancelled, you will get 1. Here F is a constant as far as this derivative is concerned. Take F out here, divide by the whole thing, F will get cancelled, you will be left with 1. So you do this, then you find that this left-hand side is a function of time only, and right-hand side is a function of R only, and T and R are arbitrary. We are not talking of an equation between T and R. We are saying these two things are equal to each other for any value of T and any value of R. They are independent of each other. Now, such a thing is obviously common. I mean, your common mathematical sense will tell you that this is not possible unless each of this is a constant. And therefore, this is a constant. This is called separation constant in the problem. The very important input is these two are equal for arbitrary T and arbitrary R. That is why each of them must be a constant. We call it E. Now, once we get this equation is easily solvable. This is a first order derivative equation in time. D by dt ft will be equal to minus, you just take IH cross to the other side and F to the other side. So it becomes df by dt equal to some constant times ft. Now this is a very well known first order differential equation. So many times it comes in physics, it comes in radioactive laws, it comes at so many places. Its solution is, but there is a complex constant. So the solution will be e to the power minus I dt by h cross into some multiplicative constant. I won't keep repeating that all these equations are homogeneous. So if this is a solution, some constant times A is also a solution, which you can absorb in UE itself. So this is the solution of the equation, provided, of course, this equation is satisfied. That means minus h cross by 2m v square ur will become eu ur. So you see, what this equation does is ft is very simply obtained. The solution is very simple, so you obtain. And what is u? U is that function which satisfies this equation. So that is the separable solution of time-dependent Schrodinger equation. A function ur which satisfies this equation multiplied by a rather simple solution of ft, which is e to the power minus I dt by h cross. So this is a solution. This is a possible solution of time-dependent Schrodinger equation when potential is time independent. Please don't think that this is the only solution, because in the original equation there was no E. There was no E in the original equation. E is from outside. So you can have any number of E's depending on, I mean, we'll come to this, what E's are possible, but E is not there in the original equation. So don't think this is the only solution. There are many solutions with many different possible E's, and you can superpose them, and then that will be the general solution. Okay, but if you concentrate on this particular solution, then this UE satisfies this equation. Just see this equation. This is called H, the Hamiltonian operator, the kinetic energy operator, potential energy operator. It is in classical physics, we also call it Hamiltonian. So this becomes a Hamiltonian operator. We denote it by H. So HUE, EUE. So that is the equation. This is called time independent Schrodinger equation. It's just a word. It means the equation that is satisfied by the space dependent part of the separable solution. This is called time independent Schrodinger equation. And as you see here, there are some terms which you have to learn. For example, this is H is an operator, and generally an operator on a function gives you some other function. But this equation is saying that U is such that the operator on H doesn't give you any other function but the same function except for a multiple. Please remember, E here does not depend on R. H is a derivative operator plus, derivative operators, double derivative operator plus V. So that depends on R. UE depends on R. E does not depend on R. It's just a number, UER. Such an equation is called eigenvalue equation of operator. Don't worry about the name. It is just a name. The essence is that the operator on the function gives you a multiple of the same function. That is the essence of what one means. We call it an eigenvalue equation of the operator. You should also understand that H will not do this thing for any function. These are functions correspond for the operator H, for which the effect of H is simple, just a multiple of. Don't think H on any function will give you multiple of that function. No, not at all. Operator on some other function, this operator on some other function which is not this kind will not give you this simple effect. It will be some other function. So that's the point. And the separable solution UER, where UE satisfies this equation, this is called stationary solution. Again, just a word, don't worry about the word. It is called stationary even though there is actually a time dependence. The reason is if you take its mod square, which is a physical quantity, this phase factor, as it is called, it goes away, it becomes 1. So psi mod square is UE mod square, and this mod square is 1. So that is why it is called a station. Even psi is called a stationary solution, although it is carrying time dependence in the phase of this thing. So it is called stationary because the probability density is time independent. And I was saying this thing, the general solution will be a superposition of such solution. It is not stationary. The general solution will be combinations of these solutions for with different ease. We are going to do that in shortly, but so for the time being now, let's talk of the time independent Schrodinger equation, and then we will return to the time dependent Schrodinger equation later. So time independent Schrodinger equation. What is this? I again repeat, where is this? Now try to understand the meaning of solving eigenvalue equation. So meaning of solving eigenvalue equation is that what are the possible values of E? This equation is not saying there is a definite E. There are many possible values of E, and for each E there is a corresponding eigenfunction. So solving this eigen means finding all the possible values of the eigenvalues E. This is called eigenspectrum, just a word. And concurrently, concurrent means at the same time or side by side, finding the eigenfunction UER for each possibility. That is the meaning of solving eigenvalue equation. Please note this is exceedingly important for quantum mechanics. So just pause for a minute and look at this equation and try to remove any misconception. This equation is not saying operator H on any function gives you E into Z. No. This equation is waiting to be solved. This equation is to be solved. It's a differential equation whose solutions we are seeking. Those solutions are UE. And importantly, E is not being specified. You know, in a certain differential equation, E can be given to you and you have to find U. No, in eigenvalue equation, E is not specified. Both E as well as U are to be determined. And so that is the meaning of eigenvalue. And when you solve this equation, the exercise may give you a finite number of eigenvalues of E. It may be a discrete infinite. That means there are infinite but discrete numbers denoted by n, a discrete index, or it can be continuous infinity of possible values. It all depends on your nature of the potential and the value of E under consideration. So only through examples we'll know all this. The way these E values are restricted is because U is not anything you like. I mean, U is, since U has a interpretation, U mod square has the interpretation probability, U is restricted first to be finite, and square integrativity demands that UR must vanish at infinity in all directions. Nowhere UR can go to infinity. If UR goes to infinity, then it will be not an acceptable function. Though it may be non-zero at large distances. Depends on the situation. For bound states, it goes to zero rather quickly. For scattering situations, it may not go to, it will have to go to zero at strictly infinite distances, but at fairly large distances, it may be finite and non-zero. And the other important condition is that UR and gradient of UR, that is derivative of UR, must be continuous at every point. Why should you be continuous? Can I ask this question in the chat? Why should UR and gradient UR be continuous? Please type your answers to this question. Gradient, UR and gradient must be continuous. I have partly given the answer, but don't give a mathematical answer. Give me a physical answer. Why UR and gradient UR should be continuous?
So the students, you can write your response in the chat box and
This is a mathematical answer that the Schrodinger equation del square u. If UR is not continuous, even it's not even del square u is not defined. I mean, it's not a definite thing. You know, if a function is continuous, it may not be differentiable. But if a function is not continuous at all, this differential coefficient doesn't make sense at all. So del square u is infinite, you may say, roughly speaking, which is not proper for the physical time independent Schrodinger equation. So that's the mathematical answer, but I want a physical answer. Yeah, is there any answer?
So somebody says probability density cannot abruptly change.
Very good. Wait, that's so my questions are very simple. Don't think there are anything very deep about it. Very good. That's the correct thing. Because if u was discontinuous and u mod square has a discontinuity, probability is a physical quantity. It is not expected to show discontinuity like that. It should be continuous. Similarly, gradient of u are, of course, it is not related to probability, but it's related to current. You know, that is interpreted as current. We had seen there very much earlier in the in this is probability density, this is probability current density. It has some problems of interpretation, but this involves gradient. So even this we would not like it to be discontinuous. So that is why physically, but of course the mathematical reason is also equally important, and I think we can confine ourselves to mathematical reason that u and gradient must be continuous, because otherwise del square u in the Schrodinger and we will not be able to proceed. Now, sometimes, you know, in Cartesian coordinates it is fine, but in spherical coordinates, what happens is a particular physical point doesn't have can have phi as well as phi plus 2 pi, for example. You see, it doesn't have definite values of r theta phi. That's the problem of the coordinate system, not the problem of the physics. So if you're using this coordinate system, UR must repeat itself after if it is at phi and phi plus 2 pi. So this is an important requirement. For Cartesian coordinates, it's not much of a requirement, because I mean Cartesian coordinates for a given point are unique. X, Y, Z for a given point are unique. So this requirement doesn't have much significance. As long as UR is continuous, it's fine. Its derivative is continuous. But for other systems, you additionally have to be say that it must be single value. Otherwise, if a function is continuous, of course it is single value. Who would deny that? So this single valued net is an additional restriction in other coordinate systems. Potential energy is usually finite and continuous, but in some model potentials it can have discontinuity also. But doesn't matter. Del square u can have discontinuity. If gradient u is continuous, it may not be differentiable. So del square u may have discontinuity. Okay, finite discontinuity. And for infinite discontinuity, something happens, we will see later in examples. So UR and gradient will still be continuous at the point of finite discontinuity in the potential. Don't think gradient UR has to be continuous. It's yet another derivative may not be continuous. So this is all mathematics. You see, a function gradient u may be continuous, which derivative may not be continuous. But derivative should not blow up, and therefore gradient UR must be continuous. So that's the point about this. Please look at the slides again and go through this point. This needs a little practice with maths, which you can do when you go through the slides again. Okay, now the time-dependent Schrodinger equation admits of, I have to rush through now, two physically distinct solutions. You will get all these points a bit clear. You know, I'm making general statements. When you come to examples, these will be seen in practical examples and you will feel more convinced about it. and you'll internalize these points. You'll understand these points better when you go through the examples. So the next two lectures are extremely important. They are going to illustrate these things. But I just want to make general statements here that there are two distinct situations which time-independent Schrodinger equation handles. One is bound states. Now, bound state, what are bound states? Even in classical physics or quantum physics, when the total energy of the system is less than V infinity, where the point of infinity is in any direction. In every direction, E should be less than V infinity. That means you need to supply some energy to take the particle to infinity. So that is a constraint of V infinity. Correct? It has nothing to do with quantum mechanics to even in classical mechanics. And similarly, unbound state, E is greater than, even in one direction, then it is not bound. So if something does not satisfy this condition, it is unbound. So which means it may be greater than V infinity, and in some directions, if in all of force it is, but even in one single direction, if it is greater than V infinity, then it is not satisfying this condition, and it's not a bound state. So these are conditions, classical as well as quantum, for saying something is bound or not unbound. And again, for both situations, E can never be less than the least value of V. Why? This is because E is equal to T plus V. And if the least value of V at that point, T will become negative, which doesn't make sense. So E can never be less than the least value of V, because the kinetic energy is always, at the moment, at most it can be zero, but it can't be less than zero, kinetic energy. So these are some general conditions. Please keep in mind, they will always be satisfied when we do the problems in lectures, next two lectures. Yeah. Now, for quantum mechanics, there are some very interesting statements that happen. And that is E less than V infinity, where the point, that's bound state. I'm repeating the statement. What turns out that acceptable solution exists only for discrete values. I am not proving these statements. I will be illustrating these statements in the next lecture 5 and 6. Proving this statement in general is a bit difficult. So, but however, you must know these statements, that bound state solutions in quantum mechanics, their energies are always discrete. This is not the situation in classical physics. In classical physics, as I told you, I mean, the energies you can have bound energies, but they can be continuous energies. There's nothing like they have to be discrete. But quantum mechanics says bound state solutions must have discrete energies. That is, the solutions of that eigenvalue equations for bound state case, as we shall see in examples, always are possible only for discrete values. This is a fantastic conclusion of quantum mechanics and explains the feature that I told in lecture 1, that bound states of atoms seem to be discrete experimentally. So we gave experimental evidence. So here is the theoretical mathematical statement that the time-independent Schrodinger equation always gives you for bound state discrete energies. For other energies, the solutions will not satisfy acceptability conditions. They will either blow up, or they may not be single valued, or whatever. There will be some problem or the other. I told you the acceptability conditions are U should be continuous and gradient U should be continuous everywhere. So these conditions will not be satisfied by other energies except a particular discrete energies where it gets satisfied, and therefore you get this. It's difficult to prove this statement in general. It's best seen through examples. So we'll see it through examples. And another important thing happens in those solutions. So it is only for discrete energies, and for those discrete energies, U always tends to 0, which is very good. So, you begin to feel confident in quantum mechanics when you get such things. It is explaining the observed features of discreteness, and very nicely for those discrete energies, wave function goes to zero, which makes sense. I mean, in bound state wave functions, you find U has probability interpretation, U mod square. So U mod square better be zero at large distances because bound states are confined, confined to local domains. I mean, they are localized. So you should not expect UR to be finite at large distance. It goes to zero as R goes to infinity. So this is as expected physically. Now we'll find that this condition is not put in by hand. What is put in by hand is UR is acceptable. UR should be continuous and gradient should be continuous. And then you solve the eigenvalue equation. It turns out to be acceptable only for finite energies. And then the ones which are acceptable are always going to zero for bound states. This is not put in by hand. Thus, the important non-classical feature of atomic domain, namely the quantization of energy, follows simply from the acceptability required of these. This is an incredible consequence of modern quantum mechanics. So these are the sort of things which gives us faith that our theory is correct. And the main goal of solving the time-independent Schrodinger equation is to obtain. Slide is, I think, main goal of solving the time-independent Schrodinger equation for bound state is to find these energy eigenvalues. And when E is greater than infinity, it's a scattering scenario. Here, what happens? UR is acceptable for any E. So E is not quantized for scattering situation, which makes a lot of sense because scattering situation, the energy is decided by the experimenter. And it will be ridiculous to say E is quantized in the hands of the, I mean, E is the energy of the beam he's trying to prepare to impinge on some certain target. And there's no question of any constraint on E here. E is continuous as expected physically, and it turns out mathematically also. In contrast to bound state, UR is non-zero, though of course finite at arbitrary large distances. Of course, it must vanish strictly in the limit R tending to infinity. But sometimes in actual practice, we do deal with non-normalizable functions for convenience, etc. But a practical wave function must always be zero at infinity. The goal in this case is to find the probability of scattering and difference. For the bound state, the goal was to find the energy eigenvalues and energy eigenfunctions. Here, the goal is because there's nothing about E. E can be taken anything you like. So what is the objective of scattering problem? To find out the probability of scattering at different angles and to find out if the particle can penetrate classically forbidden regions. So the questions for scattering problems are different from questions for bound state. Questions for bound state problems are what are these energies and what are their wave functions. Questions for scattering problems, what is the probability of going to regions which classical physics forbids, or what is the probability of scattering of the particle at a certain angle, and so on. So these are the questions. Questions to become different for bound state and state. Okay. Now, I think I have.
Yeah, sir, we are about 1 hour and there are just a few questions.
If you give me just 2 minutes, because, it will be difficult to.
Okay, sir. Okay, sure.
Yeah, just give me 2 minutes and, or maybe I think I will not go because it takes time. So I will stop at this point. These ideas of degeneracy and this lecture, I'll talk about in the next lecture when I give some examples. I'll start with this section in the next lecture. Okay. Now the questions.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So there was a lot of mathematical points in this lecture. So don't feel too intimidated. You go through the slides again. The mathematics is very simple, but it's difficult to cover all that maths in a short time. Okay, please questions. Yeah.
Yes, sir. The question is, when V at infinity is equal to 0, doesn't energy become negative in that case?
Yes, of course. We have seen so many times now that the absolute value of V is a matter of choice. So V infinity, if it is 0, that's all right. Then the total energy is negative, that's all right. What's the problem? You need some energy to take from negative energy to 0. That's the meaning of bound state. Bound state means you need positive input energy to take the bound system to bound electron, say, to the electron at infinity. So if V infinity is 0 and energy of the electron is negative, what is the problem? You need some positive energy to push it to 0. No problem.
Okay, sir. The next question is, what is the uncertainty in energy in a stationary state?
Good question. Uncertainty is 0. Uncertainty in energy state, it has a definite energy. That is the meaning. And you have already anticipated the meaning of eigenvalue equation. When in an eigenvalue equation, the interpretation which we are going to come, this wave function is called energy eigenfunction. And in this, the uncertainty is 0. If you make measurements of energy in this state, it will always give you the eigenvalue E. So the state is, so that's the answer. In a stationary state, the energy uncertainty is 0.
Okay, sir. The next question is,
Yeah.
for scattering states, what
Yeah.
are the conditions and how will be the energy eigenvalues?
The energy eigenvalues are unconstrained. They will have to be greater than, for example, you are talking of V infinity 0. For example, Coulomb potential by choice. It's always by choice, you know, the actual value at yeah. We could have taken for Coulomb potential V infinity equal to 100, whatever you want, but 0 is the simplest. V infinity is 0 for Coulomb potential. So E greater than 0 will be the scattering situation. And there is no constraint on E. E can be anything. There is no discretization of E. Yeah.
Sir, the next question is,
Yeah.
how will the solution to the Schrodinger equation change in non-inertial or accelerated frames?
I think in this, as I told you, we are always talking of inertial frames. Non-inertial frame is an entirely different story. Non-inertial frame, you will have to have some pseudo forces, etc. And Schrodinger equation is the Schrodinger equation that we are talking about is not valid in that case.
Okay, sir. The next question is,
the answer to your question is, you can always make coordinate transformations. You see, this question is often asked, what if I go to accelerated frames, etc. You can always make coordinate transformations to anything you like. So you have a Schrodinger equation, you go to a non-inertial frame. The point is, the form of Schrodinger equation will not remain same. So Schrodinger equation does not will not be covariant, as it says. It will change its form if you go from inertial frame to non-inertial frame. Now, to complete the point, if I go from one inertial frame to another inertial frame, that is, I am in some laboratory frame and I go to another uniformly moving frame, say the trains frame, what happens to the Schrodinger equation? This is a very good question. The answer is the form of Schrodinger equation remains same provided we use Galilean transformations. This is a little technical point. The Galilean Schrodinger equation retains its form. Non-relativistic Schrodinger equation retains its form if we make Galilean transformations from one inertial frame to another inertial frame. But it does not retain its form if we go from inertial frame to a non-inertial frame. So that's the answer to the
question. Sir, another question. How do we find out values of E and UE, that is the function of energy, without UE being specified.
No, no. It's asking how do you solve it? It's a differential equation. You have to solve the differential equation. And yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you are anticipating what we'll do. It's a differential equation. It will be double, second order differential equation because it's a del square. So it's a second order differential. There is E is a number. E is not a function of anything. And you go and U is to be solved. Now you start solving this equation. And we will be doing this. So you are anticipating lecture 6 and lecture 5. We will be solving this equation. Then it turns out that in order for it to be continuous, E cannot be anything you want. E will be constrained for bound states and E will not be constrained for scattering states. E will have to have certain values, only then the solution that you get is continuous and its derivative is continuous. So it's the problem of solving time eigenvalue equation is the problem of solving a differential equation in which you have added the condition that U should be continuous. That's all to it. And U and derivative of U should be continuous. So it's just the mathematics of solving differential equation with the acceptability condition that U and derivative of U should be continuous. And whatever you get are the mathematical consequences. There is nothing else. No, you don't put any more physics than saying that U and derivative of U are continuous. So that's the meaning of it. You will get this point as we solve it, the Schrodinger equation. You'll see it in practice what this is. But that is what it is. Yeah. Next question.
Okay, sir. Most of the questions are done. Just one question is, as we have seen that sometimes the Hamiltonians are looking like similar to the classical case. Can we say that sometimes classical mechanics is a special case of quantum mechanics?
No. I don't know what you mean by that. Classical mechanics, this is special case means for a certain situation, quantum mechanics reduces to classical mechanics. That's what you mean. That's not true for quantum mechanics. It is true for special relativity to Galilean relativity. Galilean relativity, you can say, Galilean relations are a limit, not a special case, where V by C is very, very small. So classical mechanics, we would have liked to say that classical mechanics is quantum mechanics where H cross compared to angular momenta is very, very small. Unfortunately, such a formulation exactly doesn't happen. Approximate formulations of this kind do exist. They are called WKV approximations and so on. But an exact reduction of quantum mechanics to classical mechanics when H cross goes to 0 compared to angular momenta in the problem does not exist. So quantum mechanics has this problem that it doesn't have a clear-cut reduction to classical mechanics. Unlike relativity, which has a clear-cut from special relativity, you can get the Galilean transformation from Lorentz transformation just by putting V by C much smaller. This is not the case with quantum mechanics. Yeah, next question. There is a thing called Bohr's correspondence principle. In some situations, quantum results reduce to classical results. I think you have seen in tutorial 1 that for large quantum numbers, where the angular momenta are much, much larger than H cross, the classical orbital frequency is also the frequency given by Bohr or even modern quantum mechanics. So there are some limits, but Bohr correspondence principle is not an exact principle. You apply it and quantum mechanics becomes classical. No, there is no such thing. That you can say is a limitation. In fact, it's something one would have liked to do, but one is not able to do.
Yeah. So the next question is, in slide 20, it is mentioned that energy can never be less than V. Otherwise, the kinetic energy.
V minimum, please, V minimum, the least value. Energy, of course, can be in quantum mechanics. Energy cannot be in quantum mechanics because of the probability, etc. The proper statement is average value of energy is equal to average value of kinetic energy plus average value of potential energy. But average value of kinetic energy always has to be greater than or equal to 0. So average value of E always has to be greater than equal to expectation value, average value of V. So we talk of average values.
Okay, sir. I guess there are no more
But
questions.
what I meant was that E, see, average for an energy state, average value of energy is the same as energy. So therefore, E has to be greater than equal to expectation value of average value of V. Now, any average value of V is greater than its minimum value. So that is why E has to be always greater than at most equal to V minimum. It cannot be less than V minimum. So that's the proof why E cannot be less than V. Did you follow the proof? You see, E has to be equal to average value of T plus average value of V. Now, average value of T has to be positive or 0. So E has to be greater than or equal to average value of V. Now, average value of V, it is obvious, has to be greater than the least value of V. So therefore, average value, therefore E has to be greater than V minimum or at most equal to V minimum. Can't be less than V minimum. That was the statement I made. E cannot be less than V minimum. That's the proof.
Okay, sir. So she says thanks. She understood. Yeah. So I guess we have no more questions at this point.
No more questions. So we meet tomorrow then. I think tomorrow is the afternoon lecture, 2 afternoon lectures. And so in tomorrow's lecture, we'll finish this part, the degeneracy and something else, 2 sections. And then we will move on to the examples where all the points that we have talked about in general will be illustrated. Thank you.
Can you stop the